Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee, Monday, the 7th of July. And I will get used to this much shorter title for this committee, but I'm sure it will be no less of an interesting and worthwhile meeting. So welcome, everybody. I'll begin with some apologies. I've had apologies from Councillor Taylor, who is substituted by Councillor Jane Burton. Apologies from Councillor Richard Watson, who doesn't have a substitute, and apologies from Councillor Baxter, who doesn't have a substitute. So welcome, everybody. If I can start by asking if anybody has any declarations of interests they would like to share that's not already on their register of interests. No? Thank you. Agenda item 3, minutes. So we have a number of sets of minutes to approve, beginning with the minutes of the corporate scrutiny meeting held on the 9th of June. Do any members have any comments on the accuracy of those minutes? Are we happy to approve them? Okay, thank you. We now have a number of sets of minutes from the predecessor scrutiny committees. Obviously, we're now operating with a new scrutiny structure. There are minutes from the previous iterations of other committees which have come here for approval. I don't expect those of you who have not attended those meetings to be able to comment on the accuracy or otherwise of those minutes. But we'll go through them anyway to see if anybody does have any comments. The first one of which is the minutes of this committee held on the 12th of May. So if anyone who was on that committee has any comments, otherwise we'll happy to approve those. Thank you. Children, Culture and Communities scrutiny of the 1st of May 2025. We happy to approve those? Yeah. Health, Housing and Adult Social Care scrutiny held on the 21st of May. Happy to approve those? Yep. And then we have Economy, Place, Access and Transport scrutiny committee held on the 25th of March, the 29th of April and the 20th of May. So if nobody has any comments on those minutes. Oh, Councillor Merritt. Yes, so some typographical issues have been flagged by Councillor Merritt and they will be reflected in the approved minutes. So thank you. So that, I think, draws a line under the previous scrutiny regime. Okay, we're now moving on to agenda item 4, which is public participation. We have one registered speaker this evening who's joining us via Zoom, and that is Flick Williams. Can you hear me, Flick?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So you know the score. I shan't give you a 30-second warning. So please do start in your own time.
My remarks today relate to your meeting held on 9th of June last. Whilst not explicitly recorded in the minutes, at minute 15 of the recording of the meeting, the Director of City Development states there was significant design change for accessibility, and he puts the figure for this at approximately £2 to £3 million. York Disability Rights Forum wrote a letter of complaint to the Executive Member for Finance, Major Projects, Equalities and Human Rights, with you copied in, Chair. To date, we have not yet received a response. To remind you of the history, the Access Forum was presented with details of the scheme as being fait accompli, with no opportunity to influence the design, contrary to all guidance, both Inclusive Mobility and LTN 120, recommending that disabled people are consulted at the earliest opportunity for all proposed schemes affecting the public realm. As a direct result of complaints made by disabled individuals, 3 community group meetings were convened, each lasting 2 hours. Some specific points of note. 1. The first meeting was informed that the cycle tracks, as designed, were set in stone and nothing relating to them could be changed. 2, if anything, the very limited changes that were made as a result took things away from the scheme. Examples are excess steel bollards from between bus shelters, which we established were not part of the HVM requirement to protect the station infrastructure and would have had an adverse effect on bus ramp deployment. 3, we removed an excess crossing point which was universally felt was unnecessary and only added to the confusion for blind and visually impaired people trying to navigate the space. 4, there was a slight realignment of the cycle tracks on the east side of the scheme to help distinguish where bi-directional track became single direction track. 5, an accessible map of the scheme was produced to aid understanding at a cost of, we believe, approximately £600. 6, it was made clear that at these meetings that mobility trainers who assist newly blind and visually impaired people believe this scheme is too complex to be able to learn and navigate safely. It was said that blind bus users would be forced to resort to using taxis for journeys by train. Consequently, it seems beyond credibility that accessibility, however defined by the Director of City Development, has cost an additional £2 to £3 million as part of the stated overspend on the project. It's hard to reconcile this with the PSCD duty to foster good relations between those with protected characteristics and those without. Central government, aided and abetted by the mainstream media, have unleashed a torrent of abuse directed at disabled people. The narrative promoted by the Director of City Development only feeds this, blaming of disabled people for all the financial ills affecting the country at both national and local level. We ask for a financial breakdown justifying use of this figure, and if the council is unable to provide it, we require a public retraction and apology. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very, very much, Flick. And yes, I was copied into the email that you referred to. I will contact the Director for City Development just to reiterate the points you've raised and ask for the clarification that you've sought, which hopefully can be provided. Councillor Lomas.
Thanks, Chair. Just to respond to that, on receipt of the email, I asked the Director for City Development to answer the specific points. There were some quite detailed points that were made in the letter, and they're gathering that information in order to provide a full response. And I'm very happy to circulate that to members of the committee as well.
Thank you. I think that would be appreciated. Okay, so that brings us to the end of public participation. So we now move on to agenda item 5, which is a Harewood Whin Green Energy Park item. So if we welcome officers to the table, let's welcome Claire and Sean. So this report is coming to us for pre-decision input ahead of an executive decision in September, October, the autumn. So the paper sets out the status of the projects, sets out the options that that have been being put forward in terms of whether to progress to a full business case or not. So if I can ask Claire and Sean to briefly introduce the paper and set out the main areas where you would like feedback from this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, apologies if my voice conks out. I'll probably have to hand over to Sean, but I'll carry on regardless. So thank you. The report today sets out our recommended approach to develop a green energy park on underutilised land north of the city at Harewood Whin, which is co-located with Your Waste and opposite a small flying and gliding airstrip club. Through development of the outline business case entirely funded by the Mayoral Combined Authorities Net Zero Fund, we propose a phased development to de-risk and mitigate issues and help deliver the benefits, both financial to the council and environmental, as quickly as possible. And these benefits are set out in the report. The scheme supports the council's net zero ambition, as well as supporting the council's financial position potentially, and demonstrates civic leadership around our ability to use underutilised land for net zero ambitions. This report today is pre-decision, as you've noticed, and Scrutiny are invited today to comment, particularly on the benefits and the justifications set out in the outline business case. Executive will then be invited to note your comments and note the outline business case and approve progression to the strategic full business case if funding is entirely provided by the Mayor Combined Authority, so no risk to the council to progress to the next stage. There are, of course, risks which are shared in the annex, the outline business case. However, these are development risks, and the decision to develop the renewable energy park will be subject to a future executive decision following completion of the full strategic business case. That's what I want to say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add that the approach we've taken with this project is to follow HM Treasury Green Book for appraising projects. That's the government's recommended framework for developing business cases, and it's designed to ensure value for money from public spending. The way HM Treasury Green Book sets out the process is strategic outline case, followed by outline business case, followed by full business case. And the work that we're presenting in this report is the work done at that strategic outline case stage. Since this was published, we have now progressed the work with the outline business case, and that will be concluded, and that will be what presented to executive in September with the decision around progressing to full business case.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the paper. It's very thorough, and it was helpful to have the appendix as well to look at some of the detail, and I think it contained the largest volume of tables in any appendix I've seen in a long time. But it was useful to have the underpinning data, which I had to read a few times for it sank in. So there's a lot to go at, but I think it's, from my reading of it, it was really around. I looked at it from the point of view of looking for assurance, looking for information on how the risks to the authority and our not just our financial position, but our reputation in terms of the commitments we've made in relation to climate change and the environment, how those were reflected in this project, and those may be areas that members want to explore in a bit more detail. So I will throw it open to members to ask questions as they wish. Who's going to go first? Councillor Whitson. And if you've got lots of questions, do feel free to kind of chunk them into.
How did you guess I might have a few questions?
Just
How did you guess?
as I did guess.
I really like the idea of it. I think it's a very positive project that we should be pursuing, but I do have a myriad of questions. Okay, and I think the risks are extremely high. I'd like to understand. I've got a whole load. You stop me when I've gone too far. I've got about 14 or 15, right? So I've got 3. So the first one, what's the rationale for going from 28 megawatts down to 1? I understand the phasing, but I don't understand from the papers what exactly happened with the local flight path, apart from a bit of glare. And that is a massive drop from 28 to 1, and then 5, and then maybe 16. Second one is, why is the business case being taken from 25 to 30 years, with an awful lot of the profit happening at the very, very back end of the project? That means we've got 20, 25 years of risk of losing money, because we are fully funding it, and nobody knows what the price of electricity is going to do. It seems to just go, it seems to be volatile, if I'm being polite. And the other one that, for the third one, and then I'll come back with the others, is why are we not doing direct takeoff? Why have we dropped that? Which, again, isn't fully covered in the paper. So I'll leave it at that at the moment, Chair.
Thank you. Who would like to have a go at those 3?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. It's the decision the original technical feasibility study showed that there was technical potential for the site to accommodate 28 megawatts of ground-mounted solar PV, and that was submitted to the local planning authority for application at 28 megawatt scheme. That scheme was revised down to 16.5 megawatts due to concerns from one of the 3 mounds at the Harewood Whin site, creating an issue of glint and glare for the airfield across the road from the Harewood Whin site, and having a health and safety risk and impact on pilots using that airfield. So it was scaled down to 16.5 megawatts. So we have planning permission to develop the site up to 16.5 megawatts right now, and we would need to submit a separate planning application if we wanted to increase it to its technical capacity of 28 megawatts. The rationale then for phasing the scheme, with phase 1 being 1 megawatt, is that provides the greatest financial benefit and is the lowest risk element of delivery of the scheme, because we have a direct offtake potential for that electricity to be used by the site operator, by Your Waste, to facilitate their activities on site. So that provides the greatest return at the lowest risk, which is why it's recommended as the first phase. The next phased element is up to 5 megawatts, and that's been deliberately sized at up to 5 megawatts because it provides us with a lower cost and simpler route for connecting to the grid, and a simpler decision-making process that avoids National Grid having to be involved in that decision-making process. So that's why we've created that threshold at 5 megawatts, and it's also a financially viable return at that scale. Future phases beyond that, we still have the ability to build out to 16.5 megawatts of capacity on the site, but future phases and scale above that initial 5 to 6 megawatts provide a lower financial return for the site, but they do provide a greater environmental and social benefit at that scale. But there's also lots of uncertainties, as you've noticed, and lots of risk. Inflation is a cost pressure, but the technological advancement in solar PV could also mean that the scheme is a lot more efficient later on, which might improve the business case. There's lots of changes to the energy market, which could impact the business case, later phases of the business case. So it's all about kind of reducing the short-term risk and uncertainty and balancing that against the long-term benefits. That answers the first point.
Well, yes and no, because some of it is being taken off by Your Waste, which is clear in the paper. But I thought we were going to do it for all of our fleet, and it says in the paper that that hasn't been looked at.
Yeah.
So it's not off the table. However, we've separated the opportunity to relocate the fleet, as you mentioned, to the Harewood Whin site and move that into the transformation programme to be part of the waste collection optimisation, because actually, as you can imagine, moving the charging of the waste vehicles and the fleet to a Harewood Whin site would change the way that you can collect waste across the city and the kind of routes and things like that. So actually, rather than having it as part of renewable energy park development, which has set out a business case based on the megawatts that we can achieve over a period of time, of the revenue and the financial benefits and the environmental benefits, it's separated that out into a transformation programme, which is about actually optimising routes and waste collection for the council. So 2 different outcomes. What we've done through the outline business case, though, is demonstrate that the 5 megawatts does achieve financial and environmental benefits through just building building the park as it stands, rather than seeking further off-takers.
So I think what I'm hearing is it's not a case of there couldn't be a reconfiguration of fleet arrangements to benefit from what may be coming downstream Harewood Whin, but it's not a
Not in material part.
it's not baked into this. Okay.
Absolutely, and having a local off-taker is the most financially advantageous solution to the scheme. So where the long-term business case might look questionable, if we had a local off-taker, suddenly that becomes a lot more attractive proposition. So it's giving us flexibility throughout the project to develop different stages as and when the business case is most viable for those elements of the scheme.
So the other 2
I
points.
think that was the first and the third.
Yeah. Okay, so we've done the direct take and the in terms of what's dictated the scope of the site. So I suppose the 30 years rather than 25.
Yes, the timescales for the project are determined on a typical life cycle for the solar installation themselves, the solar panels themselves. And we've typically seen first generation solar PV achieve a life expectancy of 20 to 25 years. And we would expect more modern systems to operate over a 25 to 35 year life cycle, which is why we've assumed 30 years, but we've created a sensitivity analysis around 25 years up to 35 years. The reason that most of the profit is at the end of the scheme, which looks like it might create more risk, but that's because we're servicing debt repayments in the early phase of that scheme. So it's representing the cash flow of the scheme against borrowed finance. And we've used the National Wealth Fund's average borrowing rate of 5.4% to model against that debt, but we have created sensitivities, model sensitivities against that as well, if that rate should fluctuate up and down. And obviously, if we're able to access grant funding, then the business case drastically improves if we're able to service some of the cost through grants.
Okay. Do you want to
Just
come back
ask-
on any of that?
Yeah, just one thing for the 25 to 30 years. So if that's the lifespan of solar panels, what then happens at 25, 30 years when they all need replacing? And when I was reading it, I didn't see huge amounts in for maintenance and for operations and stuff, which goes to later questions. But that concerns me that it's then, right, we've got to throw it all away or replace it, you know what I mean? And then reinvest.
Yeah, good question. So that would be part of the as we develop the management case and the governance case within the full business case. It might be that certain elements of the development can be replaced sooner or later than others to make sure that there's a longevity beyond that 25 to 35 year lifespan. Or when we go out and do some market engagement, we'll understand the requirements around decommissioning the site or removing the solar PV, and we'll have a more accurate reflection of costs at that stage. But it is an uncertainty at strategic outline case, and it is a risk at strategic outline case. The nature of the process is that SOC, there is a greater level of uncertainty and therefore a greater level of risk, and we will try and remove that uncertainty and risk as we go through the outline business case and full business case process.
Thank you very much. Any of the members have any questions? Councillor Merritt.
I asked about the
Trying to use your microphone.
Can I ask about the small export guarantee scheme, which is obviously crucial for the initial two phases? Does that guarantee the income over the whole life? And how does it deal with fluctuations in available price, all those sorts of things?
Good. Interesting question. Interesting delving into the detail of smart export guarantees. The smart export guarantee is the price at which you sell the electricity you generate back to the grid, national grid. Typically, smart export guarantees are for a period of 12 months, and then they are renewed and refreshed every 12 months. There are other sources of revenue that the project could tap into. We could enter into a power purchase agreement, and that is a virtual sleeving of the energy that we generate on site, which is then sold to a third party consumer. And power purchase agreements are typically much longer term. You could have a 5 to 25 year power purchase agreement, but the price is typically lower than what you would generate from a smart export guarantee. So you're trading off long-term certainty with potential increase in revenue over the short term. The smart export guarantee, one of the benefits of it being over 12 months is that if in the future we were to have greater offtake capacity on the site through, for example, relocating some of the council's operations, we would only be tied into a 12-month sale contract, and then we could start self-consuming straight away, as opposed to a long-term power purchase agreement where you're waiting for that agreement to come to an end before you can start the self-consumption on site. So there are pros and cons of both, and part of the process of going through the full business case will be negotiating an exact price for both of those revenue streams, and then determining which one is optimal to take forward.
Thank you.
How does the potential return on this compare with other potential sort of green investments?
We've done some baseline analysis against other solar PV schemes in the country and expected returns on investment and whether they've achieved their returns on investment. The nature of the site, with it being a capped landfill, makes it slightly more challenging than if it was just arable farmland, for example, and it does increase the capital cost slightly, but from a strategic perspective, it seems an excellent use of otherwise unusable land for any other purpose, and so there is a strong strategic case for that. But because of the nature of the site and the increased costs I've mentioned, the returns are slightly lower than a similar scheme that was not on a capped landfill, for example.
Mm.
That's a comparison with other solar schemes, but if we, it's quite substantial sums of capital money. Are there other ways that we could contribute to the decarbonisation total that would make a more efficient use of that money?
I don't think we're presented with an either-or choice necessarily. We are also pursuing other projects that would support decarbonisation across the city as well, and exploring sources of funding and finance for that. What this project does do is it adds to the investable pipeline of projects that we're developing as a city and in partnership with the combined authority to demonstrate the attractiveness of investing in York and North Yorkshire more widely to support our net zero and wider climate change ambitions.
Thank you. Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief question about to follow on Councillor Widdowson's question about the changes around the scheme that were taken following the objections from the airfield. I just wanted assurance really that if the technology around the solar panels evolves, which I imagine this is quite fast-moving technology, that actually that might be something that could be adapted if the technology changes in, it could be a matter of months or years before, given the timeline for the CYC to develop this kind of project. Actually, it's quite possible that by the time you're installing these panels, the glare issue will no longer exist as a problem, or that there may be a possibility, because the technology could be even more efficient, to generate more energy than you're currently able. I just wanted to make sure that there was enough flexibility in what you're asking for, that is being factored in case the technology goes in the direction we're all hoping it does go in, and actually that this can do more than currently anticipated, and that the airfield will be reassured.
Yes, certainly. I mean, that's one of the benefits of taking a phased approach, is that we don't lock ourselves into any technology now. It gives us the opportunity to sort of explore future technologies as the programme develops. And over a 30-year period, you just can't imagine actually where we're going to go with solar panels, thinking about where we were 30 years ago. So absolutely.
Thank you. Just a quick question on kind of partnerships, because as the report mentions, there's liaison with the Rufus with Napton Parish Council, which seems eminently sensible to keep those conversations going. In terms of your waste and sort of national grid partners who are obviously, your waste have an interest in terms of having an active lease on the site. National Grid in terms of sort of connectivity and eventually getting maximum benefit from the site. Is who's kind of holding the ring in terms of the management of those responsibilities? Is that something that is sitting with you essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of this programme, this project, and those discussions have already started with the National Grid and with, well, Your Waste have been walking alongside this all the way through. What's interesting, of course, about the National Grid is that we don't yet know the impact of Great British Energy. And so actually, as the phasing continues and as we move through the different stages, and hopefully as we develop the strategic business case, assuming executive approve progression in the autumn, we hope to have some more concrete information around what that might do for particularly the grid relationship, as well as potential funding of this.
Okay. Is that likely to help? Is that, in terms of what, well, is there likely to be a policy direction where this type of development would be sort of prioritised or supported sort of financially or in other ways because it hits sort of strategic ambitions?
There's certainly strong strategic alignment locally, regionally and nationally. It aligns extremely well with the government's clean power agenda for 2030 and clear policy support for this type of project, and with the regional carbon abatement route map. It also helps, I won't say it solves, but it helps with the challenge around competing land use and alternative strategic priorities for the government as well around food security. Schemes like this will not be competing for productive arable land. Just on the point previously, Chair, we have a stakeholder management plan for the project. As part of that plan, we're obviously closely engaged with Your Waste on a regular basis around the scheme. I meet fortnightly with Northern Power Grid, who are the distribution network operator for this area, and we're having monthly meetings with Rufforth and Napton Parish Council. Just on the Northern Power Grid and grid connection element, it might be known within this forum already the challenges around grid connection, the cost and time associated with getting a grid connection. The UK energy system is undergoing significant restructure at the moment. Northern Power Grid have an existing queue for grid connections, but they are introducing requirements for projects that are currently in that queue. Projects must meet a set criteria. They must demonstrate land ownership for their project. They must demonstrate planning permission for their project, and they need to demonstrate that they have the finances in place for their project. If they can't meet all three of those requirements, they will be deprioritised on Northern Power Grid's connection queue. That puts this project in a very strong position. Obviously, we own the site, we have planning permission, and we can demonstrate a route to financing the scheme. And so we are expecting quite a few projects to slip down the queue, which would mean that the proposals at Harewood Whin would be prioritised by Northern Power Grid.
Thank you for that. Do you want to come back for your second tranche of questions?
I like reading these types of things, given how long we worked on trying to get it there in the first place and the work that Your Waste and Sandy have done. It's really interesting. Quick question, and you'll know the answer almost immediately. The 1 megawatt, is that £1.5 million, £1.4 million to deliver, or is it 5? Because in the table it says half a megawatt is 700,000, but
Yeah.
in the bottom of page 60 it says 1 megawatt is 5.
It's closer to a million, probably the 700,000.
Do you want to just
must be an error in one of those, and it's
just
still
have a look at that, because I was trying to work it out across. Thank
Yeah.
you. And the business case, to get to the full business case, is that £500,000 in total cost in a couple of years?
We're scoping that at the requirements for the full business case at the moment and doing some pre-market engagement to get an idea of those costs, but we would expect it to be in that region.
Okay.
A broader point on that, Councillor and Chair, if I may, development costs for these types of projects are often the biggest barrier to delivery of these types of capital projects, because you're working in an uncertain world at that point of project development. There's no guarantee of return. commercial organisations and councils very reluctant to put up cash without knowing whether you're going to have a project at the end of it. So we are very grateful and fortunate to the funding that we've received from the combined authority to de-risk that initial development cost investment, and we've been able to do that as Claire says at no cost to the council.
Okay, and then two quick ones, and then
Yeah.
I'll shush again and
Okay.
let anybody else in. The project management side of it is a big risk, and we've seen that on previous major projects when we had Gary here, sorry, the Director of City Development, apologies, here around the table. What's being put in place to mitigate that?
Yeah, I think when he was here, the Director of City Development described how we are structuring roles within the project management function with a project management function now, and that's also happening within my team at the council. So we're having project managers on longer term contracts based on the success that we've previously had of accessing this type of funding to fund their roles, and making sure that there is consistency, not just from one project to the next, but throughout the lifetime of a project, by making sure that project managers are full-time permanent members of staff rather than tied to specific projects and the funding that's associated with those projects. So those changes are happening at the moment.
Yeah, and in addition, it's baked into our governance. So regardless of the individual, whether the individual comes and goes, we make sure that this project, the project itself has a project board, which is cross council, so that has support from other officers across the council, including commercial property, for example, legal, finance, etc. And then the project reports into the climate change and natural capital programme, so that we get oversight at that level. And then when it moves into more delivery, if you like, post-strategic business case, it will report into the City Development Board, which is chaired by the Chief Operating Officer, to make sure that as a major capital programme, which is what it will be in development stages, it reports into the right places and has that financial oversight. So although the individual project manager might come and go, and certainly the project manager who's been absolutely fantastic on this has been snaffled by the transformation programme and is going to work in the transformation programme, that doesn't mean that the project stops. That just means we need a new body, if you like, to work in the project management, but sit inside existing corporate governance to make sure it happens. And of course, the project's reported on Verto, etc., so that we keep that line of sight and that corporate intelligence to make sure nothing's left behind.
I just ask what you mentioned the climate change and natural capital programme board.
That's an internal programme board to make sure that all of our net zero projects are delivered within a programme governance structure, so that we can move around resourcing according to where the pinch points are within the projects. So that's something I chair, to make sure that the projects that sit within Sean's team and the projects that are funded through, for example, the Innovate UK Rossi programme, they don't stop delivery just because of various different barriers within the council. So we make sure everything moves forward in a programme sense.
Yep. No, thank you.
Okay.
Do you have?
Yeah, it'd be useful to get sight of that, because I didn't know it existed till I read this paper.
Sorry, which bit?
The
programme board.
The climate programme board.
Change. Yeah,
It'd be useful to get sight of that, because I genuinely didn't know. I read it and went, I don't know what it is. So if that's possible, I'd be grateful. Yes, I do have a few more. Does anybody else before I carry on? You sure? Apologies. So the ground conditions, the report is out now because you're doing it over the summer. Yeah. Is there any initial feedback or?
Yeah, at this stage, there's no indication that the mounds can't accommodate the panels. The risk was that they're clay capped, and that clay wouldn't have the integrity to accommodate the panels. We've got no indication that will be the case. It might mean some slight design tweaks, but we should be fine.
Brilliant. And then it's mentioned that there isn't a CYC energy manager, so the absence of one is an issue. How are we getting around that one?
Yeah, my understanding is that there's an officer has taken on the responsibilities of the old CYC, of the old council energy manager, and I've got a conversation with them coming up in the next couple of weeks. But even if that does remain the case, we have a framework agreement in place with Yorkshire Purchasing Organisation that manages our energy purchase, and there is a client rep that we would deal with that could support us with that activity. It's not ideal; it would be better in house, but it does mitigate the risk somewhat.
And you're confident you have enough resource in that area?
But the work that we're doing now within our team, yes,
Okay.
obviously it would be subject to funding to progress the full business case, which is still unconfirmed. But we are getting a really positive signal from the combined authority that this project would align really well with their new funding stream, which is the Energy Generation Accelerator Programme, meeting the scope and requirements for that scheme. So we have positive indication that we will be able to get funding, and that will provide the required resource to progress the business case.
Just to come into that, that's where the climate change and natural capital programme comes in, because it looks at resourcing across the piece. So actually, if there is a pinch point, that is something for me to pick up with and to manage through the sort of areas of influence I can manage to bring in the right capacity when we need it. So just as Sean's mentioned, sorry, my voice is terrible, isn't it? So just to mention the LEAP Accelerator is an opportunity, but there'll be other opportunities as we go. So we'll make sure we've got the right capacity and the right expertise when we need it.
Thank you.
Okay, and then the very last question that I've got,
Okay.
promise, maybe, is could you just talk me through the table on page 69 that goes through the timings and let me have a feel for what happens if any of that slips, because we are relatively notorious for everything slipping. So in my head, you've got phase 1 happening by 27, but the borrowing happens in 26. And then there's some other bits that happen in 28. So just talk me through that and where you think we need to really keep a careful eye on it so that we don't end up with 35 years before it lands, gets.
So if I just take that from a programme perspective and then Sean pick it up on project perspective. So because this is entirely funded by the Mayor Combined Authority, they have quite strict deadlines on when things have to be met. So you've got this report in advance of the the funders report went end of last month, that we had to have completed this stage by. And we will be beholden to them, just as we are throughout the course of any funder, that you have to meet their deadlines. And that's my job as the lead of the programme, to make sure we've got the capacity and the capability or whatever other arrangements we need in place to meet those funding deadlines, which are set out in this programme project table, to provide us with, to provide the combined authority with assurance that we will meet their deadlines at the points that they need us to. So that 2-year programme, that's them. They've set that. We have to have done it within 2 years. If we need additional capacity or capabilities, then we'll discuss that at programme level and look at what we need to do to fill it. We can't let it slip, basically, because we have that responsibility. Otherwise, we risk the funding, and we can't risk the funding because part of the benefit of the combined authority funding this is it de-risks it for residents. So we have to keep that as one of our key programme outcomes.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre. Oh, sorry, did you want to add anything, Sean?
Yeah, just to add to Claire's point, thanks. Thank you, Chair. There are a couple of critical dependencies within the table, and the reason they are critical dependencies typically is because there's long lead time, so it's good to get ahead of those dependencies. And the most pressing ones are typically the application to the network operator for the connection. We would, at this stage, we're estimating connection times and connection costs, and you can only ever estimate them until you've submitted the full application. The full application comes at a cost, so we only want to do that when we're ready to progress, and it comes with a time-bound requirement to secure your place in the queue within 90 days of receiving that application, and you have to pay a deposit off the back of that as well. So we need to be ready when we submit that application to accept and progress the scheme. So that's time critical, but it's only once we've received the costs and the connection time that we can then fully remove that uncertainty from the full business case. So that's a time critical element of the project. The other time critical elements within the timescale of the full business case are securing the contracted agreement for the energy sale price, another critical aspect of the business case, and procuring the delivery contractors and organisations to start on site. So whilst the end point is maybe not a critical deadline other than a self-imposed deadline around our net zero targets, there are critical dependencies along the way that we need to sequence appropriately and tick off in the right order.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just in terms of reassurance, so the last meeting we had of this committee, we were told in sort of in no uncertain terms that phasing was not the way forward. That was the entire problem with the station gateway. Nobody should have ever gone for phased approach. It's just a completely the wrong thing to do. So we're getting two different messages in two different meetings. But then when we look at that table on page 69, I like this. Is this halves 1 and 2 that goes into quarters? I've never seen halves before on this kind of table before, but we've got full business case approval at the earliest, H1 2026. You've then got a 2-year gap before, if I'm reading it correctly, the procuring and mobilisation of that process. Given what we've learned from Station Gateway, which is a much shorter phasing process, I struggle to see how we can have much confidence in those figures that come out in H1 2026 being anywhere near what comes through procurement 2 years later, with 2 years of inflation, global events that we're becoming far too used to. So I have real issues about whether that will actually be deliverable. And then phase 4 isn't even starting until 2030. That's 4 years after. So I can't see how any figures that go into phase 4 and phase 5 are pretty much worth anything. So it just seems very long. Phasing, obviously, we've said it is risk. This is an incredibly long phasing process. And are we certain that even to phase 2, we can have any level of confidence, plus or minus 10, 20, 30, 40% in the figures that come out of the business case being anywhere near what comes through procurement?
So if I just pick up on the first part, I can't comment about, or we can't comment about the castle, the station gateway phasing. It is a different type of phasing though, isn't it? Because this is about the solar power technologies that we can deploy on site rather than building a massive station gateway. So it's a different type of development essentially. You're right to note the risk though. So actually there isn't just risk around inflation. There's also, as Councillor Widdowson mentioned, massive volatility around the energy pricing, which hasn't settled down actually over the duration that we've been working on this programme. And whether it settles down over the duration that is set out in front of you in page 69, it's impossible to say where we're sitting right now. Certainly through the development of the strategic business case, we'll be looking at what we can control and what we can mitigate, but also bringing to executive what we can't. So there will be some gaps in that kind of understanding because it's just out of our control. We can't control the energy market or how pricing's set, which we can get into why it's set that way, but we won't. But it's out of our control as a small local authority. I'll leave Sean to pick up the actual phasing around 2, 3, 4 and 5. But just to know when we do come to executive with the full business case, we will be recognising those gaps, if you like, and those risks that still exist.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. I don't think we can give full confidence at this stage on anything. This is work concluded to strategic outline case, and this delivery plan will be refined and improved through the outline business case and full business case process. And it might be at conclusion of full business case, this delivery pathway looks very different to how it looks now. In terms of the phasing, each element of the scheme, as it's described here, each phase could be delivered as a standalone project, and so you could bring forward elements of the scheme if that's preferable. And we'll find the solution to that during the full business case. And there are pros and cons to doing that, and we've talked about those developments in technology, inflationary pressures, and you're trying to balance those pros and cons and manage that risk. What the strategic outline case does indicate, though, is that the strongest financial case sits with those early phases, and so there's a clear incentive to get those going quickly, deliver the early phases, create that positive cash flow that can then be reinvested, and you've got a positive outcome there, regardless of whether the later phases are delivered or not. On the flip side of that, the greatest environmental and social benefits are realised with the full build out and the later phases, although the financial case isn't as strong. But by phasing it later, it allows us to reassess if technology improves, if we relocate some of the council services to the site to increase the off-taker, which would massively impact the business case for those later phases. So the assumption at the moment is that phasing it reduces uncertainty and reduces risk, but we would test that through the later stages of the full business case.
All right.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. I think what I'm trying to get at, and might be helpful to bring to executive, is some sort of risk profile for those later phases. If you look at, because obviously the tables we've got on page 59, which show the 28 megawatt being 45.7 million, that's today. If that's going to be 65, 70 million by 2030, when we get round to it, there needs to be an assessment of saying, well, do you point and saying, well, actually, that's never going to happen. There's no point having that in as a phase. And I will always use the classic example of the ring road. Yes, we managed to save, North Yorkshire Council managed to save a couple of £1 million by not dualling the Northern Ring Road. But the answer to that is now it's 240 million, and that is lost. Those information needs to be there. Again, whether you can find 45.7 million to do it now is a different matter. But if what you're saying is by going for that phasing and pushing it to 2030, you're in essence killing off the 28 megawatt dream, that sort of needs to be known at the time you're making the decision. And if you have to make it, then make it, but at least have all that information, not kind of go, well, we're taking that decision because we think we're going to get 28, but in reality, we're never going to do it if we take this decision.
Yeah, that's very useful feedback. So thank you. I'll take that on board. Just to emphasise the decision in September to progress to full business case, and then within that full business case there will be one of the 5 cases as recommended by the Green Book is the governance arrangements, the management case, and within there we can set out the decision-making process for moving between the phases, delivering different phases, whether it's an executive decision for each element of the phase or whatever that looks like, that will be created as part of the full business case.
Thank you. Councillor Merritt.
Yes, the answer is probably yes, but I just wanted to check. I know on a lot of government schemes, particularly transport, you now have to put in quite significant optimism bias, allowances for not envisaging all that's actually envisaged going to actually be required in a project and all the rest of it. Is that being applied in the cost estimates for this?
Yes, it's incorporated as part of the guidance and the framework of the Green Book itself. The Green Book is in the process of going through a review and update at the moment, and the indication is that the revised version will be released in early 2026. So we will make sure that we're using the latest version of Treasury Green Book guidance, which does include a section on optimism bias.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any further hands. No. Thank you, members, for your questions and comments. Hopefully, those have been helpful in terms of, I'm sure, identifying some risks and uncertainties that were already known, and that's because that's where we are with the status of this project. But I think there is hopefully you'll have detected from members' support for the for the objectives of the scheme, which I think is ticks lots of boxes, but as with large complex schemes with interdependencies, it's never straightforward. This is probably a good example of that. But I think it is something that this committee will be keen to receive updates on, maybe through sort of regular or briefings at key points in the life of the project, and maybe a future decision point coming back to this committee. But hopefully that will have been of some help. Yeah, Claire.
I just wondered whether it'd be helpful bringing back a discussion around the risks. So given the variability in the risks and the fact that Councillor Eyre has noted that we could be setting out a risk profile now for something that actually will be undeliverable in 25, 30 years, whether when we do come back to you, we spend that focus looking at the risks and what the actual kind of rationale, mitigations and controls around them are. Because that's the sticking point, isn't it, really?
Yeah, because I think a lot of the comments around the how rather than whether, and again, sort of learning from kind of other projects. But you mentioned the sort of embedding the sort of project management approach, which hopefully will make some of that a bit easier to predict and to manage. So that probably be helpful because it has applicability across other how other projects are managed as well. So we can find an opportune time to have that conversation. Councillor Merritt.
Yes, I'm just thinking in terms of the new scrutiny arrangements, is that something that actually needs to come to the committee, or is it something that should be a briefing item?
Yeah, I think I'm thinking back to previous iterations of this committee when we did have a presentation on project management back in when Dave Atkinson was in charge of projects quite a few years ago. Just in terms of understanding the council's approach to project management, risk management. Now would probably a good time to have that conversation again as a briefing for members, so that when we're coming into these discussions, we've got a good baseline knowledge of the approach to project management, and embedded within that is risk management. So that'd probably be a sort of a briefing for members would be helpful, which we can add to our list of briefing requests. Any other questions or comments? No? Thank you very much, Claire and Sean. Councillor Kemp, thank you for coming to listen. And Councillor Lomas. So those who have no further interest in the items, please feel free to leave. I don't trust the place. Okay, let's move on to agenda item 6. This is a proposal for a task and finish group to look at budget setting and the council's medium-term financial strategy. So this comes out of a discussion we had at the last meeting when Debbie Mitchell came and spoke to us about how this committee can most usefully contribute to the the council's budget setting process and be informed about and help inform the medium-term financial strategy. So what we've got today is really the next step in terms of seeking to turn what was agreed at that meeting into a fully formed task and finish group proposition with aims and objectives. Guy, would you like to say anything by way of introduction?
Nothing really further to add, really, Chair. And just in terms of the timescales, so the timescales for completing the committee's work would be that recommendations to executive should be completed by the Corporate Scrutiny Committee meeting for consideration at its meeting on 17th of January 2026. And the recommendation also includes a proposal to consider and agree the membership of a task and finish group. Thank you.
Thank you. So if we start with any comments or questions on the aims and objectives of the task and finish group and the methods that are set out in the paper and the timescales. Councillor Merritt?
I think we covered this pretty well at the last meeting. I'm just happy to move that we agree on.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eyre?
feel like I shouldn't say anything now. No, it's a massive piece of work. I think in terms of, I mean, obviously the aims and objectives are fantastic. Challenge how resources are allocated, used and their impact, identify evidence-based options for reducing costs, generating income on new models of delivery. I'm not 100% sure how that's achieved through the methods and the time frame. As someone who has done that for many, many years individually as portfolio holder, as the portfolio holder will have done now. Taking the adult social care budget, for example, it would probably take 4, 5, 6 meetings with the relevant director to get down to the detail of that budget before you even start to look into how you challenge and evidence reducing costs. That's all. Are we biting off more than we can chew?
I mean, because we haven't really done this before, I struggle to picture in my mind how the task and finish group would prioritise in terms of focusing on corporate spend, departmental spend. There's a lot to go at, but I think this is the right approach in terms of a smaller group of councillors having that discussion. I'm guessing to a certain extent, I see that being the product of conversations with officers and executive members in terms of this task and finish group will not be able to cover in fine detail all council operation, but I'd welcome Councillor Lomas's thoughts as to how you think this can actually be, a useful piece of work that can hopefully add some value.
Yeah, I think we should, when we're thinking about things like this, we should remember we're not being recruited as a team of auditors or accountants. We're being recruited to look at how the decisions are made. We want a group of people to come together and look at how the decisions are being made about where to spend money, not to look at every single budget line item of which there are way too many, as Councillor Eyre says. But we are not auditors. We have our own internal and external auditors who do a great job in doing that in detail, deep dive. We have an amazing team, our finance team, who do the technical accountant's job. We're not asking anyone on this committee to do those professional jobs that people are well qualified to do, and we have people to do that. We're looking at how we prioritise, how we decide where we allocate budget, where we take budget away from. That's what the role of scrutiny is. And I think you can become very bogged down in, well, why do we, spend X pounds and pence on this? But that doesn't really get you anywhere, because an awful lot of our budget is spent on delivering statutory services. And so they're not things you can just not do. There are ways that you can spend your money more efficiently to deliver those statutory services, but it's not that anyone here is going to be expected to make a decision about specific line items. This is about making sure we've got good scrutiny of how those decisions on budget are made. It is about making sure we have good input on how we manage consultation. This is about making sure that we have the input we need into the process. And I don't want anyone to be put off by thinking they have to be, you know, an accountant or an auditor to be part of this group, because that's not what it's about.
Thank you. That's helpful. I suppose one way to think of it is there is a budget setting process. So the task and finish group could scrutinise that process rather than necessarily the contents of budget proposals. I think it would be difficult to do one and not the other, or to just exclusively look at process. With that could be a task and finish group in itself. I mean, would it? I'm trying to make sense of it in my own mind. If I were going into do that piece of work, obviously we know what is in the council plan and what our various 10-year strategies set out. So is it a case of looking at the process, but also looking at budget proposals in the round and thinking, are there any gaps? If so, where, in terms of the proposals addressing the agreed priorities of the council? That's, I suppose, one way of looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Debbie's original proposal was that there would be scrutiny of the medium-term financial strategy, which is obviously what we base our budget on. Then following that, scrutiny of the proposed process for consultation and engagement on the budget. Then following that, scrutiny of the budget proposals that are going to go out for consultation and engagement. And then following that, scrutiny of the proposals that are then going to go forward and form the budget. So that was I think, quite logical. Those are the points at which it makes sense for a group to be looking at what is happening here, what is going to form the basis of the budget. So here's the medium-term financial strategy. These are the things that we are building in to form the base of our budget. Then layer on top of that, what's the process we're going to use? Then layer on top of that, okay, we've looked at the process. Now we're going to look at what are the proposals that are going to go out for engagement. Then look at the responses from the consultation and how that feeds in or doesn't feed into the final proposals. That's what we're looking for in terms of budget scrutiny, rather than somebody to kind of sit in a room surrounded by spreadsheets for months on end.
I think that articulation is, I understand that more than I do aims and objectives at paragraph 2 in terms of what's the medium-term financial strategy, because that kind of drives the rest. What's the process through which residents will be engaged, maybe in terms of talking about priorities rather than individual proposals, then scrutinising individual proposals, and then the final recommendation, which I understand maybe saying the same thing, but that makes more sense. If I were a member of that working group, I'd kind of think, oh wow, that's a lot.
And I think that if you look back at Debbie's paper that was presented to the last meeting, Chair, I think, you know, she did set those steps, and perhaps that needs to be more prominent in this paper.
Okay. Councillor Eyre.
Yeah, see that description fits more with what is being outlined in terms of what will happen, which to me I don't see as much value in. I think that is just sort of fact checking on terms of savings proposals at an earlier stage. It seems very much like that. The more interesting bit actually is the bit in the aims and objectives. Those two bullet points you made, and there are statutory responsibilities. There are not statutory services. They're not statutory budget lines. None of those are. So I did a piece of work quite a long time ago, taking, for example, that social care budget and doing comparative spend across, for example, older people's spend, physical health, physical disability, sensory disability, mental health, and learning disability. And that shared some interesting statistics. For example, our learning disability spend was probably 180% compared to the national average. our physical disability spend was probably 60% of the average. That's the precise thing around challenging how resources are allocated. There are options within that, and unless if we're looking at that, that's how we do it. Otherwise, it pretty much is just this is a 30 savings proposals. Which ones do you like? Which ones do you want to know more about? And I don't think that is what moves us forward and isn't really scrutiny. What we need to do is have that comparative data. We can do like for like with our statutory neighbours, for example, parking charges. We can look and say, well, actually, what is that compared to all of that? All of those different information gives you a better sense of how you challenge how resources are allocated.
So I think we are the Corporate Scrutiny Committee. So our role is to scrutinise the budget setting process, and not the budget itself, but in terms of the budget setting process and the strategy. That I know it's difficult to divorce you're looking at the budget thing. Well, I can't come to view whether the budget fits the strategic goals without delving into the detail of the numbers. But that's, as a Corporate Scrutiny Committee, that's not our job. Arguably, the other scrutiny committees could do exactly what you were talking about in terms of doing looking at our spend on certain services as in comparison with other authorities, and that's something that obviously you've done before and might be worth doing again. But
which I don't disagree with, but they need to delete those first.
Yeah, and that's what
aims and objectives.
I think where we derived at was that the aims and objectives under paragraph 2 could be interpreted as meaning all of that, whereas what I think we all think we mean needs to be expressed differently so that we're clear about the scope of this piece of work. It's corporate scrutiny, and this is corporate budget setting. So yeah, you're right to pick up that you can read that and think, well, it could mean anything. Could mean a detailed deep dive into lots of different areas of council spend, but that's not the intention. Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, Chair, I mean, obviously we had a good discussion about this at the last meeting where Debbie's proposal was accepted, and obviously there's maybe something got lost in translation between her paper and this paper, and perhaps a revision can be done to bring through a better set of aims and objectives that better reflect what there is scope to do. And just on Councillor Ayre's point, you know, whether spend in different areas is right or wrong will often, or compares to other areas, will often depend on what the priorities are and what the needs are and what's being done. And those decisions about what are the priorities, what are the needs, what are the areas to focus on, they sit with other committees, and then obviously the budget follows that. So I think it is very difficult to avoid sort of straying into the management of everything that is done within the entire council through budget, because obviously everything at the end of the day has a cost. Every single thing that we do. But what I think we're trying to achieve here is to get a better process for scrutiny members' involvement in the budget setting process. And that's what we're trying to achieve. And I think, you know, we can probably best achieve that by being really clear at the beginning about what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like for members of that committee.
Yeah, and this is something this is new. So we will learn as we go. We may, at the end of it, think, well, yes, we can do more, or no, we need to take a radically different approach. That's fine. You know, there's no right answer. Councillor Widdowson.
I think the idea is laudable. And I think some of it, if it's clear and shortened, might be doable. My concern is how you don't stray into the political.
It would require...
Because the budget is political. where your strategy is, what you as a, you know, whatever the group that is in control decides to do. And the risk is you will get a group of people around the table, it's been discussed, it's been agreed, therefore that is what everybody on the council agrees. So I think there is a high political risk in some of this.
I think it needs to be very clear from the outset. There'll still be a budget council. There'll still be amendments to the budget, whatever budget is agreed in all probability. This is something that other councils do, and that's something that I think we can do. And it's not a case of politics has its place in all we do, but in scrutiny, and this hopefully comes through in the shared values for scrutiny is identifying this space as something, as a place where some of that work can be done, and we've done it in the past. I'm sure we can do it again, where it's not driven by purely political, but yeah, that has its place, but it's being very clear as to what the purpose of this piece of work is, so that it doesn't become overtly political, because then it defeats the whole object. But it's a point well made in terms of something that everybody who's involved in this work will need to be mindful of. Got Councillor Merritt, and then
Yeah, I was going to echo largely what you've just said. Thinking about West Yorkshire Combined Authority Scrutiny Committee that I've been sitting on. It's been taken quite clearly by all the members that the mayor sets the priorities. We're not there to argue about the priorities. What we're there to scrutinise is that those priorities are being, the process is executing and delivering those priorities or not. And if is the process working right? I think that's how we will have to go into this.
Yeah. So you could spend a lot of time saying, well, I disagree with that strategic priority, and I don't think you should spend any money on that. That's not the purpose of this. It's, as Councillor Merritt said, looking at the process that gives effect to those. Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, just to reassure everyone that the proposal that Debbie put forward was based on both the SIPFA and the LGA best practice guidelines for budget scrutiny. So it's not something that is out of step, and in fact, in a way, in York, we have been out of step by the way we have done our budget scrutiny over recent years. So it is based on best practice guidance. It's not something that's been sort of made up.
Yeah. Okay, so I think with the caveat that we need to do some more work on the wording of paragraph 2, aims and objectives, so that it sets out more clearly what the purpose of this piece of corporate budget scrutiny is. Are members happy for to delegate that to the chair and vice chair, supported by officers, to come up with something? We'll circulate it around just so that people are clear about it. In terms of membership of this task and finish group, which it will be there'll be a time pressure on doing this work. I'm not going to ask for volunteers now. Volunteers can come from this committee. They don't necessarily have to come from this committee. They can come from the broader council membership. So I would ask if I take an action on behalf of my group and Councillor Merritt on behalf of your group to find willing volunteers or unwilling volunteers, and I'll take an action to speak to Councillor Stewart as leader of the Conservative group. In terms of numbers, what do members feel an appropriate total number of members of this group should be, and what the balance should be? We've kind of gone 2-2-1 of late. Are people happy to at least aim for that? Aim for that split. If we have a different balance based on willing volunteers, then people happy with that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
If people around the table respect the new rules of the game,
So give
the
them,
actual numbers don't matter.
Yeah.
If people do start abusing it a bit, it has to come back here, and it will go through a majority decision.
Yeah, and again, it's a point worth making. The task and finish groups report will come here, and then it will be for this committee to consider, what feedback or recommendations that group comes up with. Okay, thank you for that. That was it was a helpful discussion, because I think certainly I'm clearer as to what the purpose of this task and finish group is. So thank you, everybody. So while we're on the task and finish group discussion, we'll move on to the next proposed task and finish group, which relates to the Boundary Commission for England's impending review of the size of City of York Council. So by way of background, the council leader, I think on the back of discussion with other group leaders, has asked Scrutiny to take forward this discrete piece of work in terms of convening a task and finish group with a view to coming up with a recommendation to go to executive that would then go on to full council for a response from City of York Council to the Boundary Commission for England in relation to the future size of City of York Council, i.e. number of councillors on City of York Council. And the paper sets out the background, and there is a draft task and finish group aims and objectives document. Guy, would you like to add anything?
Nothing. Sorry. Nothing really to add to that, Chair, other than, again, just to perhaps set out the timescales for reporting. So the intention would be that the draft recommendation would be considered and agreed by the Corporate Scrutiny Committee on the 29th of September. So that's a meeting that's currently been identified as a corporate scrutiny calling meeting, but the intention would be to run that as a meeting to consider the committee's recommendation there. That would then be considered by executive on the 7th of October. And then the recommendation would be taken to the extraordinary council meeting on the 16th of October, ready for the deadline to back to the Boundary Commission, which is the 17th of October. Thank you.
Thank you. So another time-limited piece of work. Do any members have any comments on A, the proposal in itself, and B, the draft aims and objectives of the task and finish group? No. The one point that maybe Councillor Merritt can pick up is the extent of resident engagement that the task and finish group members may wish to avail themselves of, because the reading through the information from the Boundary Commission, they anticipate submissions from the council, from political groups. They seem to be silent on. I don't think they're expecting representations from interested parties, residents, civic organisations, but then it doesn't seem to exclude that. So it'd be helpful for me if you could explain a little bit around how you think members of the task and finish group might go about seeking input from interested citizens. Put your microphone on.
I wondered whether this was something that the council could use its talk about. Or in the sense of just testing, you know, if there are any sort of general views out there on some of the numbers questions. The first point, which is the part where there's no formal consultation by the Boundary Commission. And the other one was whether we have a day when people can come and talk to us, a half day, couple of hours, if we can advertise it adequately. That's obviously the key question.
Yeah,
I think we just need to explore it as a task group to see what's practical, what's reasonable. And decide whether we proceed from that point or not, rather than specifically agreeing something at this point.
No, thank you for that. Councillor Coles.
Thank you. Just a kind of minor concern really that particularly around public engagement, there's a risk that unparished areas of the city, which is mainly the centre of the city, will end up being they risk being underrepresented because parishes will be, by nature of their existence, they're an organised thing, they're more likely to naturally engage in this kind of process, and just what mitigation we ought to just think about, how we ensure that the areas of the city that aren't parished don't inadvertently end up being underrepresented in the community engagement side, because by definition, I think parished areas will be more likely to be engaged. I might be proved wrong in that, but that would be certainly my experience of dealing with these boundary reviews in other parts of the country, is that parishes are generally very good at engaging in boundary related discussions for very obvious reasons, that they care about their patches and they want to stay together. But that does, by definition, then risk that other parts of the city could end up being not so well represented. So just something that we ought to be mindful of in that community engagement, which probably means that it should add more weight potentially to Councillor Merritt's point about the council using the mechanisms that it's got citywide to reach all citizens proportionately.
So I think I think in terms of the task and finish group is looking at part one, so just the size of the council. I entirely agree. Certainly part two, in terms of how you group communities into wards, I think that's a very legitimate point in terms of make sure there's awareness and people are, have the opportunity to comment. I think in terms of the first part is a kind of a technical exercise in terms of what an appropriate number of councillors on City of York would be. I think it's something for the task and finish group to bear in mind in terms of if they say, well, we'll just go around and we'll send an email out to parish councils and ask them. Clearly, that would explicitly exclude all of my residents and many others as well. So yeah, I think that's something that whatever approach the task and finish group decide to make, they'll need to be conscious of not inadvertently excluding certain citizen residents because of where they live. Yeah, that's helpful. Anything else in terms of what is hopefully a quite a discrete piece of work, and I think piece of work that I think for those involved and keen on this kind of work should be quite interesting. Again, I'm not asking for volunteers, and my expectation is that the membership of the task and finish group would not be exclusively from this committee, and I certainly have no interest in or expertise that would be of use. So again, if myself and the vice chair can, we can work together to seek expressions of interest in joining a group, and again, taking a similar approach in terms of a representation from the groups. And it's worth saying at this point, I would, as this is, as it would be a recommendation from the council that would be being put together. I think we should note that the task and finish group, we would have an expectation that they would reach out to the the independent councillor on City of York Council, who obviously doesn't sit within any of the groups, who I'm sure would welcome an opportunity to have some input. Yes, already received. Any comments or questions from anyone? So we're happy to proceed on the basis of that proposal. Super. So we now move on to agenda item 8, which is the work plan. So over the past couple of weeks, the Vice Chair and I have held meetings with executive members, with officers, to start pulling together a forward plan of items to come to formal committee meetings, and through that build up a list of items that could come to informal briefing sessions. There'll be an informal meeting of this committee at a date to be determined in the next, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I was waiting for Councillor Taylor to return, so he's able to indicate what dates he might be able to make, and to use that meeting to share with the wider committee some of the information we've gathered from the informal meetings that we've had thus far, and try and piece together an outline schedule of agendas for the remainder of this municipal year, and a long list of briefing items. So looking at the forward plan on page 135, we've got September's meeting, and I think we'll be double checking to make sure that it still fits with the sequencing of decisions. The council's 10-year anti-poverty strategy, undertaking some pre-decision scrutiny on that. Our next meeting would then be in November, where we would have. So yes, I'll just finish if I may, and then you'll see some items listed for November. A couple of standing items in terms of the annual complaints and compliments report, and then council motions and petitions, and then a potential item on local nature recovery strategy and local net zero accelerator program. I say that's where we are at the moment, but I say it may change depending on what other requests come through. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Just to note that we've just agreed to have the boundary review come to the 29th of September, which obviously isn't on that forward plan. So is the intention to have 2 meetings in September, or move the 8th to the 29th?
So the 8th will stay as it is. The 29th is penciled in as a call-in meeting, but what we try and do is we hold those call-in meetings so that it's used either for a call-in and or to pick up any other business which we can't, which couldn't wait until the November meeting. So that meeting is there and has been earmarked for to pick up the item that we discussed earlier. So that's where we are with the work plan, but hopefully by the end of July we'll have a more fully formed outline. Councillor Widdowson.
Can I just ask that we've got the community woodland as unallocated. Could I just ask that we brought, it's not just the community woodland, it's trees in general. I think that needs to be looked at sooner rather than later. We've got a significant failure rate this year across the piece, and it's they can only be planted between October and March, and if we don't get a grip on it, we're going to have another year.
So we had a very interesting discussion at the Place Scrutiny Committee a couple of weeks back about tree management, because that wouldn't come here. So the community woodland comes here under the climate change banner. You could make a case for it to go to Place. It's but that was picked up at Place Scrutiny. We had a good discussion. So fear not, it is being it was and some of the issues with failure rates were picked up. The community woodland is really will probably be a sort of briefing in terms of obviously it's a significant project in terms of meeting the council's climate change ambitions, and it's been a while since we had an update in terms of now it's up and running, how's it going, and hopefully getting Forestry England to the table as well. Anything else on the work plan?
Can I just add?
Yeah.
If I could just add just one very minor item. So under the 19th of January meeting, I think there was an agreement from the committee that would receive the final report from the budget task and finish group. So if the committee is happy with that, we'll add that to the work schedule as well. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Right, thank you for that. Agenda item 9, urgent business. There isn't any, so thank you very much for your attendance and participation, and have a good evening.